Welcome to the overview of Module 3, the relationship selling process, the steps leading to initially meeting the customer. This overview of Module 3 starts with a brief introduction. It then goes on to identify the chapters that are covered. We will then describe the key learning objectives of each of the chapters. From there, I will present some highlights, key salient points of the module itself, and then we will conclude with all associated readings, assignments, and assessments related to this module. Remember, this overview is not a substitute for reading the actual chapters that are assigned to this module. In Module 3, we begin our journey in exploring the 10 steps of the selling process. This module specifically focuses on the first 3 of those 10 steps. So we will be looking at prospecting, the pre-approach, which is really planning your call, and then the actual approach to the customer, our initial contact with the customer. The final 7 steps are actually covered in Module 4. So let's think. It all begins with finding prospects that we can sell to. Without generating new prospects, our customer base will eventually disappear. And there's a lot of reasons for that. No matter how good we are at managing and maintaining accounts that we already have, and we need to spend time doing that, believe me. If we don't generate new business, then every time a customer leaves for whatever reason, they go out of business, they get merged with some other account that doesn't buy from us. We may be dealing with a customer owned by a single proprietor who happens to die and the business dies with it. The customer's needs may change and no longer need the type of products we sell. There could be all kinds of reasons why we lose business, and certainly not all of it is our fault. So if we don't manage that customer base by adding new business, by adding new activity, we will eventually be managing a downward sloping line. So that's why prospecting is really the lifeblood of selling. It's what keeps us going. It's what keeps our sales funnel vibrant and healthy. Within Module 3, we will look at the various prospecting methods, and there are plenty of them. And we will examine really what does a good prospect look like? What are the key criteria that really qualify a good prospect? And this is crucial because if we don't know what they are, then anything that crosses our desk, any lead, looks like a good opportunity. And we could be wasting our time chasing opportunities that actually are not opportunities and will never result in them. So we have to use our time wisely, and we have to be very laser focused. And the only way we can do that is if we know what we're looking for. And if we know what a good customer looks like, we try to find more that look like that customer. So we will explore how applications such as CRM, customer relationship management software, can help us effectively manage that sales funnel of ours. And we will learn how technologies such as social media and social listening are changing the prospecting function. We will also look at how to effectively plan our sales call. And this is vital because our sales call plan is really our roadmap for that sales meeting. And without a plan, we have no idea where we're going and what success actually looks like. So it's very important that we have a clear and concise sales call plan. And this chapter will talk, this module will talk to that particular point. So we can begin our presentation strategically, and we can quickly determine the prospect's needs and be able to generate attention and interest in our solution. The chapters covered in Module 3 are as follows. We start with Chapter 6, which is all about prospecting and why it indeed is the lifeblood of selling. Then we look at Chapter 7, which gets into the pre-approach, which is really all about planning your sales call and presentation. And we conclude with Chapter 8, which is the approach. And it focuses on how to begin our meeting, our presentation, strategically. The key learning objectives of Module 3 are as follows. In Chapter 6, we will explain the importance of prospecting as the lifeblood of selling. I once had a manager that said, you know, if I'm a hammer, then everything looks like a nail to me. You know, anything that crosses my way, I'm going to beat because I'm a hammer, and that's what hammers do. And it's the same thing when you are without a plan regarding prospecting. You're like that hammer. When you don't have a plan, you don't have any methodology, you don't have any strategy around prospecting, then what happens is anything that crosses your desk, any lead, any tip, is automatically an opportunity. And you can be spending all kinds of time going after situations that will never result in a sale. And when you do that, you get a lot of no's, you get more desperate, and then even more things look like great opportunities because now you're really desperate. Desperation removes selectivity. So it's important to have that plan, understand what you're looking for, what prospecting methods are best able to help you reach those customers that you're looking for, and a process and how to qualify those opportunities. Without that kind of strategy, you're like that hammer where everything looks like a nail to it. Every opportunity is a great opportunity, and that's not true. Some of the other learning objectives of this chapter is that we'll demonstrate how to properly qualify a prospect. And really, our ability to qualify a prospect really separates the truly successful salespeople, the real pros, from the amateurs. The amateurs spend too much time dealing with people that will never buy from them. Why? Because they don't know the right questions to ask, so they don't really understand how to get to the heart of the matter and really know if this is a quality prospect or not. They don't have a roadmap. The professionals understand the information they need to gather to make that determination whether this individual is worth spending more time for because there's truly potential there, or whether it's not a good fit and I'd be wasting his time and my time by trying to pursue an opportunity that doesn't work. So this is crucial to understand how to qualify a prospect. But what we're really doing there is testing the quality of that particular prospect. And that will help us prioritize the opportunities that then appear in our sales funnel and manage our time. So we will be looking at how to also explore the various prospecting methods. So there are so many of them out there. Some are quite traditional and some are more social and digital in orientation. For example, LinkedIn, Facebook, and some of these new technologies, social networking, are relatively new to the prospecting function, but are very vital. So we'll talk about those as well as some of the more traditional methods of prospecting, like cold calling, referrals, centers of influence, trade shows, and so on. We'll also be able to explain how the new technologies, such as social networking and CRM tools, are impacting how we generate and manage prospects today. And finally, explain some of the guidelines for prospecting. Guidelines such as, selecting and customizing the prospecting methods that work for us. I just mentioned earlier that there are many different prospecting methods, but not all of them are methods that will work well for us. We need to understand our situation, what type of customer we're dealing with, and then from the various prospecting methods that are out there, look at, select, test, and finally customize those methods that work for us. Earlier, when we were talking about Module 2, I talked to you about that roofer friend of mine who, has a roofing business. And he mentioned that one of the ways in which he looked for new customers was to just use his eyes, observe. The need for new roofing is pretty obvious. You drive through the neighborhood and you see, whose shingles are warping. And because he'd be working in a certain subdivision, whatever, it wasn't hard for him to observe, go around the neighborhood and see, and then maybe approach those homeowners at some point. What I'm getting at here is observation was a good prospecting tool for that person because the type of service that he offered was such that the need was quite obvious. You might be selling other products like life insurance or things like that where the need may not be so obvious. So observation may not be the best prospecting tool for you, but it may be something else. So that's what I mean by understanding your market, your customer, your products, and then selecting which is the most effective prospecting tools that you can use. The other thing about some of the guidelines around prospecting are prioritize your prospects according to their potential. So just because you have a list of interesting prospects, they've kind of met the criteria of what you feel a good customer looks like, that doesn't still make them all equal. Even though they may all be attractive, some will be more attractive than others. So it's important for us to prioritize our prospects so that we, select them in a way that we devote our time first to this tier of customers, then the next tier, and then the next tier. And ultimately, establish a regular calling cadence. There's nothing worse than, doing a cold call or doing a prospecting call, reaching out to a potential prospect, one day here, one day there, one day there. You never get any momentum when you do that. And you end up relearning all the mistakes again that you made 3 days ago. It's far better to, when you get into your prospecting mode, and you should have a regular prospecting mode, that you set some time aside each day or set a full day out of several days to do nothing but prospecting. What you're going to find is when you do that, when you reach out to customers and you call, you get better with each call. You start to revise your pitch. You start to revise your technique. You start to anticipate certain types of objections. You start to get better at handling them. So having a regular call cadence gets you up that learning curve much quicker and gets you more efficient. And that only happens because you're doing a bunch of them at that time. So you're not relearning mistakes every time you do it. You're improving on what you just did, and you get better results. So these are just some tips and guidelines of others that you will see in Chapter 6. In Chapter 7, which really focuses more on the pre-approach, this focuses more on being able to explain the importance of sales call planning. And I think I mentioned earlier that if, nothing's more important to, achieving success in a sales call than having a plan, having a clear set of objectives, that is what it is you want to achieve in that call, and a plan on how you're going to achieve it. So in this chapter, we're going to talk about how to set smart call objectives and what are the things we need to know and do in that call to help us achieve those objectives, so we don't repeat past mistakes and we are able to we're able to be more effective in our call. And by the way, as I mentioned at the previous juncture, you will be doing your own sales call plan as part of an assignment later in this year in preparation for your sales presentation. So you will have some ability, or opportunity, I should say, to practice that. Also part of Chapter 7 is to be able to list and analyze the 4 planning steps in developing a customer benefit plan. In Chapter 8, we get into the approach. And the approach is our first kind of meeting, foray, first real interface with the customer. And in this chapter, some of the learning objectives involve being able to develop an approach strategy that will impress your customer, and we will look at examples of different approaches. So think of the approach again as that first, meeting with the customer where creating that good first impression is so critical, where the opportunity for rejection is very high, because at this juncture, especially if they're a new prospect, they're going to know very little about you other than what they've read and researched, and you about them. So the tension is high at this point. The opportunity for rejection is very high at this point. So we need strategies to be able to break the ice quickly, to put the customer at ease, reduce the tension, and generate interest, attention, and desire to proceed. So being able to build rapport in a way that does not alienate the customer, and in a way that reduces that initial anxiety and tension that comes with really, not knowing each other, is really, really crucial at this time. We're also going to look and, we're going to look and discuss at the different types of, qualifying strategies. As you know, it's very important to be able to qualify the opportunity quickly. So that means being able to understand, is there a need for what it is I'm selling? If there is a need, does the customer have the money or the budget to be able to afford what I'm selling? Sure, I would love a Mercedes, but can I afford it? So one is need, but the other one is the opportunity to be able to pay for it. And the third is, do you have a customer, or a prospect, I should say, that has the authority to make a decision? Sometimes we're dealing with businesses, especially, who may need what we sell, who may have the budget or the financial capability to afford what we sell, but they don't have the authority to make decisions on what we sell, or purchase decisions. And this could be situations where a company has very centralized purchasing, where the purchasing is done out of a head office, which is outside of your jurisdiction. So that may be an opportunity for your company, but it's not an opportunity for you necessarily, because the purchasing authority is not within your territory, but it could be within the territory of another sales rep within your company that you may want to refer them to. So these are just some of the factors that we need to look at to see if we have a qualified opportunity or not. And we're also going to look at some of the questioning techniques to get at this type of information, especially the questioning techniques around uncovering needs, because uncovering needs is a tricky situation. Sometimes customers don't know fully what they need, so asking them outright is not going to really accomplish a lot, and it may even turn them off. They may feel threatened by that. So sometimes direct questioning doesn't work, or they may have an idea of what they need, but they need help in terms of flushing it out, in terms of expanding on it and elaborating on it. And sometimes customers may simply not want to volunteer that information on a first call, especially if it's approached in that kind of direct manner. So for all these reasons, It's the way we try to uncover need is crucial. We want to do it in a way that is matter-of-fact, business-like, gets to the point, but is not offensive. So we'll look at a strategy called SPIN. So SPIN is a questioning approach developed by a fellow named Neil Rackham. He wrote a book, Spin Selling. And basically the SPIN stands for situational, problem, implication, and need payoff. SPIN. And this doesn't mean a lot to you now, but as we get into chapter 8, we'll see exactly what those questions are. So there's a series of questions around situation, a series of questions around problem identification, a series of questions around implication, and a final series of questions around need payoff. And we will see how this questioning sequence works extremely well with customers, and it allows us to get to the heart of the matter rather quickly and efficiently. Chapter 6 deals with prospecting. The sales process involves a series of steps or actions. In fact, your book identifies 10 clear steps that are involved in the selling process. And they all begin with prospecting. So prospecting involves the process of locating and qualifying individuals or businesses that may have the potential to buy our product or service. A person or business of interest who might become a prospect is a lead. So think of a lead as what precedes being a prospect. So a lead would be a piece of data information, like a name, a contact point, that may be a person of interest that we need to qualify further. We need to research, we need to find out more about that particular individual or company to see if indeed there may be an opportunity there for us to pursue. So a lead is really just simply a data point, a piece of information that needs to be followed up on. To determine if a lead can become a qualified prospect, it has to pass at least the following 3 hurdles or questions as a minimum. The first is really need. In other words, does the prospect or we're looking at have a need for what it is we're selling? That's the key criteria. The second important criteria is, do they have the ability to pay for what it is we're selling? So in other words, money. Can it afford what we're selling? And the third important criterion is authority to buy. In other words, is the decision-making authority within my territory, within my area of jurisdiction? For example, if I handle the Greater Toronto Area, GTA, as my sales territory, then I'm looking at potential prospects in that territory. And if I may come across one that looks quite interesting, they may have the need, they may have the ability to pay, but perhaps the purchasing decisions are not made in my territory. They're made at head office in some other jurisdiction, maybe in the US. So that could be a good prospect for my company per se, but not necessarily for me as the sales rep of this territory, because the decision making is not made in the GTA. So I would perhaps pass that lead on to our sales rep who handles that territory in which the decision making occurs. So it's important that the decision making authority be in the jurisdiction in which I serve to be a qualified prospect. Now, there are other things that qualify a prospect beyond these 3 that I mentioned, which were need, authority to buy, and ability to pay. There are others in addition to that, but they might be more specific to the particular product or service we're selling. So each company might have an additional set of criteria that's specific to them. For example, if I'm selling products that appeal to the small to medium business sector, then companies that fit that profile, small to medium business, which is usually defined by a certain number of employees and revenue, then that would be another criteria that would be part of the qualifying criteria. For other companies, the additional criteria might be geography. We only service the Canadian market, so that's a criterion that it has to meet. And for others, it may be other factors as well, like how familiar are they with our solutions or products right now. So each company will have an additional set of criteria in addition to those three that we just talked about. Another interesting concept that's brought out in Chapter 6 is the Ferris wheel concept. And basically what the Ferris wheel concept addresses is the fact that no matter how good we are at managing the customers that we already have, if we don't continue to increase our base, continue to prospect and generate new customers and bring them into the fold, then ultimately our customer base is going to be a downward sloping line, because we're going to lose customers for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they leave us because they go out of business, or they merge with some other company and now they're part of some other entity, or their needs have changed and no longer require what it is we're selling, or other reasons. So there could be a variety of reasons, whether they're of our doing or whether they're not, that could determine why we lose customers. So it's important for us to be constantly looking for new opportunities, new customers to bring into the fold, to bring into the funnel, so we can offset that. And that's really what the Ferris wheel concept depicts in a graphic form. Now, there are several methods of prospecting, and these are explained in Chapter 6. Some of them are quite traditional. For example, trade shows, mail-outs, referrals, endless chain, cold calling. These are all traditional, tried and true methods of prospecting. And some of them involve newer channels, like social media, social listening, and so on. So to obtain a continuous supply of prospects, the salesperson has to develop a prospecting method that's suitable to their particular situation. So for example, what you're going to find is there's a lot of prospecting methods, some of which I just mentioned, but not all of them are going to be equally effective for your particular situation. Nor would you want to employ a whole vast variety of prospecting methods. You want to pick the ones, the 2 or 3 or 4 that work well for you. And a lot of times that involves experimenting, seeing what works, what doesn't. And every so often you want to review those prospecting methods to see if there needs to be a change or something else has come along that's going to be better at generating those leads for you. So there's a variety of types of new technologies out there that help us basically manage and monitor our prospects. There's a lot of CRM software out there like Salesforce.com that can allow us to do that. Additionally, social media allows us to review and monitor the opinions and attitudes of potential leads. For example, before social media, a lot of our research was basically looking at websites, looking at financial sites where we can get information about customers financially, trying to really get a picture through talking to other people who may know that prospect. It was a multifaceted approach to try to get information about a particular prospect. And that still is true today. But with the advent of social media, things like LinkedIn and Facebook and so on, they've brought our ability to get information about a prospect to a whole new level. If I effectively use sites like LinkedIn and Facebook, I can find out things about a prospect that I couldn't get before. For example, what interests and hobbies does my prospect have? What types of other areas that they've been involved in. For example, are they opinion leaders? Do they have their own blog? If so, what are they saying in that blog? Does that give me some insight into their opinions and attitudes about things? All of these things can help me gain a level of knowledge of a prospect that I can only dream of in the past. And a lot of times I can research that prospect, let's say through LinkedIn, and find out what clubs, what communities they're involved in, because that will give me an idea of where their interests lie. And I can also check, do I have any connections that are in common with that prospect? So in other words, I may not know that person directly that I would like to approach, but some of my connections might know that individual. So I can use a connection to create some more information that I can gather about that person, and also maybe introduce me to that person as well. So prospecting is evolving, and as sales reps and salespeople, we need to be aware of these new technologies to help our process move along much smoother. So we saw in the previous chapter that leads that pass through the qualification filter, i.e. those series of questions that determine what a good prospect is, then become prospects. And prospects are really potential opportunities to focus on, potential interesting opportunities that may turn out to be a business for us. And here's where the work begins, because now we have to plan our approach to those particular prospects that are on our list. And like everything else, we need a strategy to be effective. So we want to make sure that we have thought out things like, when's the best time to call? When's the best chances for us to be able to connect with that particular prospect? And what are we trying to accomplish in that call? What we call a sales call objective. And by the way, every meeting, every contact with a customer needs to have a specific sales call objective, whether it's our first contact with them or subsequent contacts as well. And your book says that there's some basic principles that should be incorporated in any sales call objective. They talk about principles called the SMART principles, S-M-A-R-T. The S stands for specific. Any sales call objective has to be specific. It can't be something as general as, well, I just want to reach out to my customer in this meeting. That's not specific enough. But it may be something like, I want to find out in this meeting, who are all the buying influences that I will need to talk to and set up subsequent meetings to make sure that, I address their concerns. That's a specific objective. Or it could be something specific like, by the end of this meeting, I'd like to secure an order for. That's specific. The M in SMART is measurable. So in other words, no objective is effective unless we can measure it. And it could be a quantitative measure, like I'd like to secure an order for 55 units. That's objective, that's easily measurable. Or it doesn't have to be exactly a quantified number, but something that we can see by the end of this meeting whether we have achieved it or not. The A in SMART is for achievable. We want to set objectives that are not too difficult to fulfill. So don't set an objective that's so high that it'd be almost impossible for you to have any success in that meeting. The R in SMART is for realistic. It's almost like defining the bottom end, which is don't set an objective that's too easy to fulfill as well, because then again, it doesn't become very meaningful to us. And the T in SMART is time-bound. In other words, by the end of that meeting, what is it you want to accomplish? What does success look like by the end of that meeting? And you can also look at time-bound as, what would you like to accomplish with this customer by the end of the year? The other part of the other major part of our planning and preparation for the call is developing and reviewing a customer profile. And think of the customer profile as your homework on this particular customer or company that you want to approach. So you want to make sure, for example, in a customer profile, that you have a clear understanding of who the individuals are or individuals are that you'd like to approach. Do we have any information on what their role is in the purchase decision? For example, there might be 2 or 3 people that you know of that you would like to approach in this company, and one of them might be more the decision maker, and one of them might be more an influencer or a key recommender. It's important to know that. Now, we may not know all of that information going into our first call, but if we don't have a checklist, if we don't have an idea of what it is we'd like to have going in, then of course we're not going to be prepared. So this helps us prepare and see where our information is and where the information gaps are that we'd like to get. And we might be able to get some of that information through our first meeting, through our first contact with the customer. Other areas of information that comprise the customer profile are things like competition. Who are they buying from now? If they're a prospect and they're not buying from us, then they're buying from someone else. So who are they? So we can gain some insights. A lot of times knowing who they're buying from and what they're buying gives us an indication anyway of what their needs might be. What's the history of this account? Have they ever bought with us? Or they've always been with somebody else? Do we have a history of how they buy? Do they buy in bulk? Do they buy through tender and RFP? How do they tend to buy? What are some of their practices, policies, procedures? Are they facing any business challenges that we might be able to help them with? Or opportunities that they want to seize that we can also be able to help them with? So all of these things, do we have an idea of what they might need or what their critical needs might be? Have they changed? Have they shifted? So these are all things we'd like to put in that customer profile that kind of give us a checklist of information going into that call. Now, again, we may not have all of this information, or as much of it that we would like, but that's life. But knowing what it is we'd like to get and have, and seeing what we've got and what we don't have, then gives us an idea of the information gaps and where we need to fill them through our calls with the customer. A lot of this comes together in what we call a customer benefit plan. And your book talks about this in chapter 7. This will help you develop a business proposition for your customer. Think of it this way. If we have an idea of what they may need, then we can start to align the features of our solution relative to those needs and what the advantages are of each of those features, and in turn the benefit to the customer. Remember we talked earlier in one of these previous modules that developing a FAB, feature advantage benefit worksheet, is very much the core to any presentation. Understanding what they need, then aligning the features to those needs and what the advantages are to the customer to each of those features, and then ultimately what's in it for the customer. So think of this area, this customer benefit plan, is really addressing a few key questions. One is, what are the things that we can do for them, i.e. the features and advantages of our solution? And why are they important to the customer? In other words, what would the customer see in that could help them solve a problem or meet a need? And that's the benefits. So this becomes kind of the nucleus to your presentation that from there can help you generate things like pricing and margin, ROI, and so on later on down the road. And then from this we can later on start to see how we might want to put some of these ideas together in a more formal format, for a formal presentation. So here we would look at what kind of visual aids that can make our presentation more informative, more creative, in making the customer and bringing these ideas out and capturing their attention and interest at a much more high level. Think of it this way. We first need to dialogue with the customer, verify what it is they need, talk to them a little bit about what it is we can provide for them and how we can help them, gauge their level of interest to see if this resonates with them. And then later on, we can put a lot of these ideas together in a more formal presentation. And that could be some type of PowerPoint presentation, or we incorporate some kind of physical demo of our product to them to help bring out those ideas clearly to the customer. So, really by adhering to these guidelines for planning our sales presentation, it helps us become much more effective and much more able to connect with our customer. So let's look at where we are at this point. We started with a bunch of leads, and leads are just simple data points, a person's name, phone number perhaps, contact information. Could be someone who's expressed some interest at a trade show, and you have taken those leads and you have put them through a qualification filter. Remember, we talked about the three key questions that need to be answered in that qualification filter, such as, do they have a need? Is the buying authority within my jurisdiction? And do they have the ability to pay for what it is I'm selling? And remember, we said there could be other qualification criteria as well. But essentially, let's assume that some of those leads, not all, some of them, have passed through the qualification filter. And those that go through the filter, we classify them as prospects. And prospects are interesting potential opportunities, ones that we now want to follow up on and spend more of our time on. And last chapter, we talked about putting together a customer profile, preparing our approach to those prospects, designing a plan on when to call, who to call, what kind of information can we have at the ready that will help us be conversational in that call. For example, what their potential needs might be. Do we have a feature advantage benefit worksheet worked out so that when we get into that conversation, we identify their needs, can we talk about the relevant features, advantages, and how the customer wins, i.e. the benefits of that solution. All that was part of the planning and preparation that led us now to the face-to-face engagement or encounter, as it were, which is what we call the approach. So the approach, which is discussed in Chapter 8, is really about our first face-to-face encounter now with the prospect. So here's our chance now that they're going to meet us, not only hear us, but likely see us. And even in the days of COVID, which we have now, they may not see us physically, but they may see us in terms of electronically or digitally. Either way, we now have our first real contact, interactive contact with the customer that's beyond the prospecting phase. So the challenge of the approach is to gain the customer's attention and initial interest in a relatively short period of time. Think of it. You're introducing yourself. They've introduced themselves. At this point, the possibility of rejection is quite high. The customer still has in their mind, who are you? What can you do for me? Is this a good investment of my time that I've given you an opportunity for you to talk with me? So we want to make sure that the answers to those questions are all positive. So creating a good, positive first impression is extremely important in helping us allay the anxiety, the tension, and build a climate in which we can establish rapport with our customer. In more structured or simple presentations, this can be accomplished by just simply using a statement, some type of thought-provoking question or demonstration approach. So for example, sometimes a good way to get the customer's initial interest is to ask them a question that's related to their business. So we can get them talking about their business and identify any opportunities for us to then engage in that discussion. In more complex or technically oriented situations, where, you and the prospect, must agree on the needs and the problems, and a questioning approach such as spin might be more effective. And think of spin as a questioning technique that we use in situations where, the need is not so apparent. We just can't ask the customer, do you think you'll need this? Or do you think you have a need for our product? We need to work with the customer to discover that situation. So a fellow named Neil Rackham developed a questioning sequence, if you will, called SPIN. And SPIN really relates, it's an acronym, it relates to the sequence in which we ask questions. The S in SPIN, S-P-I-N, deals with situational questions. In other words, when we're trying to uncover need where the need is not so obvious and it's a more complex situation, we start with situational questions. We get the customer talking about their current situation. Tell me, Mr. Customer, what are you using now? How are you using it? Who's using it? What kind of situation are you in right now? So once we have a pretty good idea of their current situation, what they're using it, how they're using it, who's using it, what kind of process they're using, etc., then we can get into what's called P, or the problem-oriented questions. And these are where we try to uncover some potential sources of dissatisfaction. For example, well, Mr. Customer, how satisfied are you with your current unit? Are you achieving the goals and objectives that you've set? What are those goals and objectives that you've set? So in this sense, we get an idea where there might be some gaps. The situational says, here's where they are. Problem indicates, are they achieving what it is they want to achieve? So in other words, is where they are where they'd like to be? And wherever there's gaps, there's the potential for problems or something they may need to help them bridge that gap. So then we get into things like implication. So, Mr. Customer, I'll give you an example, because sometimes it's easier to speak in terms of examples than just in the abstract. Let's say you're selling an office coffee making system, like these services that go around and replenish the coffee supply and take care of the coffee maker and make sure they have a different array of packets of different coffees and teas for a business operation, let's say. So it's an office type of situation. And that might be the business that you're in, for example. So as far as situation questions go, you might want to ask them questions like what coffee service they're using now. Are they using a coffee service, or are they just making it themselves? And those types of questions that relate to where they are. The problem implications might be, and let's assume they're using a competitor's coffee service just for the sake of argument. The problem type of questions might be more like, are they happy with the service they're getting from their current supplier? And what types of things that they might see that they would like to improve and see better. And sometimes a customer might tell you, well, yeah, I'm pretty happy with who I have right now. However, if you let them talk a little bit, they'll usually tell you some potential areas of dissatisfaction. Maybe I'd like to see a better selection of coffees. They're always giving us the same 2 or 3. Or the coffee maker is a little bit slow, and therefore we get lineups at the coffee maker, and that means that people are away from their desks, and when they're away from their desks, they're not productive. And so I'm kind of losing productivity because the coffee maker is slow, and it's causing a bit of a work issue. If that's the case, then it's easy for us to transition then to the third sequence of questioning, which is the I in SPIN, called implication. And implication questions are questions in which we ask the customer to really identify then what is the potential negative impact on their business if things stay the way they are. So, for example, we might ask, well, Mr. Customer, you've told us that the lineups are a little longer than you'd like, and it's causing a little bit of a productivity issue. then what's the impact on your business if you just stay with your current supplier? And so that's where you get the customer thinking about the problem and how it negatively impacts them. And there's nothing more powerful than to get the customer talking about their own problem themselves, rather than you saying, well, you've got a problem and here's our solution. If I say something like that, I'm just a sales rep, and they could easily become defensive and challenge what I say. But if we get the customer thinking this through by asking them questions of where they are, situational, what are the issues, i.e., what are some of the problems they're having that they're not achieving their goals? And then what are the implications on your business if this continues? It's the customer telling us their situation and telling us their problem and telling us the potential negative impact on their business. And this is what you want. And the N in SPIN is what we call need payoff questions. So, Mr. Customer, if I were able to describe with you a system that we have that offers you a wide variety of coffees and is faster than the current system you're using, thereby eliminating or greatly reducing lineups at the coffee maker, would you be interested in learning more about that? So you see what I've done here now. In the implication side, or the I questions, I've got the customer to describe the pain of their current situation. In the need payoff, I get the customer thinking about the potential gain were they to go to a newer system, such as mine. So need payoff is asking the customer, how will you benefit if you were to have a solution that directly addresses these problems that you talked about and the negative impacts on your business? So SPIN is a very powerful questioning sequence because at the center of it is the customer. We simply guide the discussion by asking questions in the right sequence that get the customer talking about themselves. So we'll learn more about that as we go through Chapter 8, but it's a very powerful tool when you get in situations where the need isn't so obvious. We just can't talk about need. It's important for us to do a need discovery with the customer themselves. So it's important that, to understand that in developing our approach, we really want to imagine our prospects asking themselves, do I have the time to listen to, talk with, or devote attention to this person that's in front of me? In other words, these are the questions that the customer always has in their mind. Is this person wasting my time or making the best use of my time by asking questions about me that are relevant to my business and therefore can help me? Another area of Chapter 8 is to ensure a favorable impression in most selling situations. Words are not going to be enough. Remember, the customer is not only hearing you now. This is not over the phone where you tried to get the appointment going. That's part of prospecting. This is where you now have the appointment and you are in front of them and they do want to hear what it is you have to say that can help them. And they're not only going to hear you, but they're going to see you. Whether it's face-to-face, we are face-to-face physically, or whether it's through electronic means that we're going to be doing it through Zoom or Skype or whatever. Either way, they're not only going to be seeing us, but they're going to be not only hearing us, but they're also going to be seeing us. So things like our dress, our dress, grooming, manners, punctuality, making sure we're on time, our vocal quality, our body language, all of these things, our facial expressions, all of these things are going to say a lot about us beyond just the words. And if we do them correctly, they will make our words much more impactful. Some of this we already discussed in a previous chapter on communication, and it's all going to come back again and be reinforced in Chapter 8. Another key element of Chapter 8 is questioning. Questioning is a strategic tool in the salesperson's arsenal. It's one of the most important tools. In fact, the salesperson really has two very, very key tools in their arsenal. One is listening, and we talked about it earlier, and we're going to see it again, that listening is so important because it helps us fully understand not only what the customer is saying, but why they are saying what they're saying. We listen with our eyes and we listen with our ears. The other part of it is questioning, and that's the other vital tool. Knowing what questions to ask and at the right time. We already saw a questioning sequence strategy called SPIN in the previous point that I raised. But questioning in general is a very vital strategic tool. And there's basically, different types of questions. Your book talks about 4 basic question types in this chapter. There are direct questions, open-ended questions, rephrasing questions, and redirect questions. And I won't get into all the nuances of them now, but basically think of it this way. Questions are very strategic. We use certain type of questions when we want the customer to talk more, to elaborate, to give us more of an idea of why they're saying what they're saying. Those are what we call open questions. Questions designed to get the customer to elaborate. You can't answer those questions with simple yes or no answers. And there are other types of situations where we want the customer to confirm or deny what we've summarized or what it is we're saying. And those are what we call closed questions. And they could also be rephrasing questions. These are questions where we want to now summarize our understanding of what we think we've heard the customer say, and we simply now need the customer to say, yes, you understood, or no, you didn't quite understand, here's what you missed. And those are what we call closed questions, and those are very important questions when we want to confirm our understanding of a situation. So questions need to be asked strategically. Excellent questioning skills, as I mentioned earlier, are going to require the other very important skill, which is excellent listening skills. So really, in order to be understood by your customer, you need to first understand them, and that's where listening comes in. So active listening is extremely important. We have to not only listen for words, but listen for feelings, try to empathize with the customer, where they're coming from, and we listen with our eyes. What's all that nonverbal information that's coming my way? And is it consistent with what I'm hearing? And again, the nonverbal are the mannerisms, the gestures, the body language, the facial expressions, all those things we've talked about. This brings us to the conclusion of Module 3. At this point, I'd like to summarize the readings and assignments associated with this module. As far as readings go, I'd like you to read chapters 6, 7, and 8 from your text. There are some supplementary readings that are not mandatory, but certainly would enhance your knowledge and understanding of the material, and they are as follows. The Power of Prioritization, which is really an infographic by Zant. Also like you to take a look at How to Prioritize Sales Leads, an article by Jonathan Lautaha, and an excellent publication called The Definitive Guide to Sales Cadence by Zant. There is a small video as well, a LinkedIn video called The Elevator Pitch, which you could take a look at. I'd also like you to look at and view the PowerPoints associated with these chapters of Module 3. And those are the PowerPoints for chapters 6, 7, and 8. So please take a look at those. Assignments related to this module are as follows. There's a video exercise entitled Prospecting, 20 Years and Still Cold Calling. It relates to chapter 6. Now you're going to view the video, answer the questions, and submit them, and that's worth 3% of your grade. There is a case study assignment associated with this module. It's the one on chapter 8. It's point 8.2. It's called Copy Corporation. So it's case 8.2 at the end of chapter 8, and it's called Copy Corporation. Again, you're going to read the case, answer the questions, submit them to me, and that's worth 5% of your grade. There is a test coming up on modules 1 and 2. So all of the chapters related to modules 1 and 2, and that's to be taken during week 6. And that's worth 15% of your grade, and that's done online. So for all of your assignments, please go to your course calendar, and they are listed there with the due dates.